Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this pre-concert talk. My name's Gregory Squire. I'm one of the first violinists in the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, and I've really enjoyed playing this program, and I'm particularly enjoying perhaps sharing a few thoughts about it with you before it starts tonight. Tonight's concert showcases 3 musical masterpieces, all written on American soil. Dvorak's New World Symphony was written and premiered in New York. Steve Reich was born there, and Mason Bates is currently composer in residence of the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. All 3 are recognized as amongst the greatest and most influential composers of their generations. Mason Bates was recently described as the most performed composer of his generation. Steve Reich is considered by many to be the greatest and most influential living American composer. And Dvorak, well, we all know about him. Now, Dvorak's humoresques were actually written after he left America, and I'll be coming back to that a bit later on in the program. But this is what Dvorak had to say about his own music. It is the poor that I turn to for musical greatness. The poor work hard. They study seriously. If in my career I have achieved a measure of success and reward, it is due to some extent due to the fact that I was the son of poor parents and was reared in an atmosphere of struggle and endeavor. We'll come back to Dvorak and this quotation, but first a few thoughts on the music which makes up the first half. We begin with Steve Reich's 3 movements. Catchy title. It's actually awesome stuff to play. So this is what Steve said about his music. I write music and I want people to listen to it and care about it and have it make some difference in their lives. When I'm fortunate for that to happen, then of course I feel very, very good about it. I saw a recent performance of students in the Royal College of Music Orchestra on the occasion of Steve Reich's 80th birthday. In just about every close-up, you can see they are totally engaged, shifting with the music, animated faces, smiling, leaning into each other. Tonight, you'll see the stage is set up rather unconventionally. 2 string bands, one on the right, one on the left, providing antiphonal effects. Basically, what we try to do is we try and put the guys on the other side off by playing different rhythms and spiky stuff. In the middle, there are 4 pianists and 4 percussion players playing tuned percussion. As you can imagine, they take up quite a bit of space. So finally, behind them are the wind and brass and a few other percussion things. Just so you know, the 3 movements follow without a pause. And watch out for those tuned percussion players. You will never see 4 instrumentalists more, what's the word? Not exactly scared, but boy, are they focused. If Reich's music is based on a kind of algebraic formal structure, then Bates found perhaps a more romantic inspiration for his violin concerto, through his own imagination, perhaps through his dreams. He wrote, "The search for novel sounds pushed me surprisingly into primeval territory, resulting in a concerto filled with ancient animals. The first movement is entitled Archaeopteryx, named after one of the earliest dinosaurs, which could both run and fly. The piece begins with percussive, well, very percussive lower strings, as you'll see, and angular rushing solo passages before a new and lyrical melody takes place, as if the Archaeopteryx has just discovered it can fly." Bates was delighted to be able to write a concerto for tonight's soloist, and had this to say about his approach to the solo line. What has always inspired me about is the violin's range. Huge, beautiful leaps are possible, even in the most lyrical passages. So I started playing around with wide intervals. And one day I found a long, alluring melody. It took a few days to fashion that tune into proper shape, but once I had it, the game was afoot. When I gave this talk in Christchurch a few days ago, from the windows, while this passage was being played, I could see out to the foothills, and I could just imagine somehow this dinosaur coming back to life and just gently floating down. It's a beautiful melody. You're going to love the concerto. But as the three movements follow each other without a pause, I thought it might be helpful to add a couple of musical signposts to help you navigate through this alluring and colorful work. The first movement lasts about 11 minutes. It begins with those edgy and disjointed rhythmic motifs that we often hear in contemporary music, before gradually transitioning towards the melody you've just heard. About 2 minutes before the end, the whole orchestra joins in and gives you an almost Hollywood version of that melody, before it gradually again transitions to almost disappearing, with the soloist staying on a high note, with soft percussion accompanying. The second movement has got lots of interesting sounds, more from the double basses and cellos, who I can't really, but they sort of go kind of sinking underwater sort of sounds. The final note of the second movement is a unison C for the orchestra and the soloist, and it gives a moment of repose before the soloist takes off, challenging the orchestra to compete with joyful virtuosity. The second half, as of course you know, is given over to perhaps Dvorak's most famous work, his final symphony entitled From the New World. In September 1892, the Czech composer Antonin Dvorak came to America with his wife, eldest son, and their daughter. He was a simple man. His father was a butcher, and he was the eldest of 9 children. He drank beer, not wine, was an avid train spotter and pigeon fancier. And he was by nature either rumbustious or diffident. It was the promise of financial security. He was going to earn 1.5 times what the mayor of New York was currently earning, and the challenge of creating a national school of music, which prompted him to accept Jeanette Thurber's offer of the directorship of her recently founded National Conservatory of Music. Privately funded by the Thurbers, the conservatory was open to all, meaning African Americans could attend, and even women. The main challenge Mrs. Thurber set Dvorak was to found an American school of composition, and when she introduced him to a young black singer, Harry Burleigh, the scene was set. Burleigh had learned the Negro spirituals from his grandfather, who'd been a slave, and Dvorak became fascinated both with the sentiments and the nobility he found in these melodies. When Harry sang the spiritual Deep River, Dvorak was deeply moved, crying, "Why? This theme is worthy of Beethoven." I should sort of stop there, really, shouldn't I? They're beautiful. In many ways, Dvorak was a simple man, drawn to nature and the land, and simple folk. And he became convinced that the songs of the plantations could form the basis for a uniquely American school of musical composition. He said, "The music of the people is like a rare and lovely flower growing amidst encroaching weeds. Thousands pass it, while others trample it underfoot, and thus the chances are that it will perish before it is seen by the one discriminating spirit that will prize it above all else. The fact that no one has yet arisen to make the most of it does not prove that nothing is there." What Dvorak immediately realized in these melodies was a shared musical harmony with his own bohemian background. Much of that resonance was based on something very simple, a pentatonic scale. This is it. The unique thing about a pentatonic scale is that you can play any or all the notes together, and it actually kind of makes sense. You don't have any discords, mainly because there are no semitones. Try it at home next time you're near a piano. Play away on the black notes and you'll sound, well, not quite like Chopin, but maybe not too far off. If you move to any other random notes on the piano, you might end up sounding a bit more like Schoenberg. What Dvorak might not have known is that the pentatonic scale is an almost universally used means of writing music of the people. It's almost as if there's a human genetic inheritance in all of us, which responds to this combination of notes. O Susanna, pentatonic. Auld Lang Syne. And the melodies from China have almost become cliched by the use of this scale. Here's the opening melody from the Butterfly Lovers Concerto. And those of you who can remember back to 1971 might remember Don McLean, pop singer, in his American Pie album. One of his songs is a tribute to Van Gogh. Starry, starry night, pentatonic. So it was no surprise then that when Dvorak came to write his New World Symphony, that he uses this scale often, most notably in the melody which begins the main theme of the second movement. In fact, so popular did this melody become that one of Dvorak's American students wrote words to it, and it became one of the most popular songs in the repertoire of Negro spirituals. If the premiere in New York of the New World Symphony was received with tumultuous applause and excitement, it was a very different story in Boston. New York was a young and rapidly growing city with a multicultural mix and forward-thinking social views. Boston was old money, and the knives were already being sharpened ahead of Boston Symphony's performance of the symphony from the New World. Boston's critics had already volleyed opening shots the previous year, describing Dvorak as a Negrophile and his Requiem as barbarous. After the Boston premiere, a battle of words erupted between the Boston Journal and the New York Times. Here are some of the best, or worst. New York Times. The American people, or the majority, learned to love the songs of the Negro slaves and to find in them something that belonged to America. If these songs are not national, then there is no such thing as national music. Boston Journal. The Negroes encountered by Mr. Dvorak seem to have a singular habit of whistling bohemian tunes. The Times. We are inclined to regard it as the best of Dr. Dvorak's works in this form, which is the equivalent to saying that it is a great symphony and must take its place amongst the finest works in the form produced since the death of Beethoven. Boston Journal. Mr. Dvorak's symphony, whilst on the whole a delightful and refreshing work, could only really be appreciated properly by an audience composed exclusively of intelligent Negroes and combed and washed Indians. These strongly differing views have to be seen against the backdrop of a young and rapidly changing country. The Civil War had ended less than 30 years previously, and opinions were still very much divided as to the merits of a United States as an entity. And then there was the Wall Street Panic of 1893. The wheat crop had catastrophically failed throughout the States, and as a result, hundreds of banks closed, thousands of businesses failed, and numerous farms ceased operation. The New York Herald commented, "The results of this great industrial panic can hardly be exaggerated. Poverty on a scale never known before in this country has been forced upon multitudes of people. What chance does a ragged man in broken shoes and a worn-out hat to get a position as a bookkeeper? Feed a man, yes, and you make him comfortable, but clothe him decently, and you restore his hope and self-respect. As a result, a benefit concert was proposed by the Herald Tribune to clothe the poor. The Conservatory Orchestra would perform and be joined by vocal soloists and a chorus made up entirely of African Americans. Dvorak agreed to conduct, and in a letter to the Herald he wrote, "This concert gives every man, woman, and child in this city an opportunity to do something towards clothing the hapless thousands pressing on all sides for help." It must have been an extraordinary evening. Dvorak directed a symphony orchestra and a chorus 130 strong. Soloists included the celebrated black soprano Cicerietta Jones, alongside Dvorak's own assistant, Harry Burleigh. Another of Dvorak's prize students, Maurice Arnold, took over conducting duties to lead the mostly white instrumentalists in his own composition, American Plantation Dancers. And the concert ended with Dvorak's own arrangement for orchestra, soloists, and chorus of perhaps the most popular of all Negro spirituals, Old Folks at Home. Now, Way Down Upon the Swanee River might seem to be an unlikely choice to be transformed into bohemian colors, but the words must have resonated with Dvorak, suffering, as he always did, from acute homesickness. "Oh, brothers, how my heart grows weary, far from the old folks at home." Of course, nothing is completely black or white, and Dvorak recognized this in his parting essay to America, published in February 1895 for Harper's Magazine. Here are the final paragraphs. "It is a proper question to ask, what songs, then, belong to the American? What melody could stop him on the street in a foreign land and make the home feeling well up in him? Their number, to be sure, would be limited. The most potent and beautiful, according to my estimation, are certain of the so-called plantation melodies and slave songs. I, for one, am delighted by them. But it matters little whether the inspiration for the folk songs of America is derived from the Negro melodies, the songs of the Creoles, the Red Man's Chant, or the plaintive ditties of the homesick German or Norwegian. The germs of the best in music lie hidden among all the races that are commingled in this great country. When music has been established as one of the reigning arts of this land, another wreath of fame and glory will be added to this country, which earned the name Land of Freedom by unshackling her slaves at the price of her own blood."
Way down upon the Swanee River, far, far away.
Join in.
There's where my heart can turn ever. There's where the old folks stay. All up and down the whole creation, sadly I roam, still longing for that old plantation and for the old folks at home. All the world am sad and dreary everywhere I roam. Oh,
How my heart
darkness,
knows.
how my heart
enjoy tonight's concert.